Welcome to the basics of hypothesis testing. So the idea here is we want to test a claim. Again, we want to test a claim. Again, we have sort of a base assumption and then a hunch. So we have a base assumption and a hunch. And basically we take a sample and see, is that sample surprising if the base assumption were true? So we take a sample and then we determine is the sample surprising if the base assumption were true. So we're going to walk through this sort of in general with more spread out steps. And then in module 21, we'll specifically focus on hypothesis testing for proportion. So our steps, first up is understand the problem. This is essentially, we're just trying to figure out which type of problem are we working with. So determine which type of problem we are working with. So you can check out my video on the types of claims to test for that. And then also, we just want to sort of pull out all the relevant information and translate it into symbols. So pull out the relevant numbers. And translate into symbols. All right, we'll see how much longer I can go before my daughter decides she's had enough. Next up, we state the hypotheses. So we should put the hypotheses both in words so that you can go back and know precisely what it is you're arguing, as well as in symbols. So we should put the hypotheses both the null hypothesis and the alternative hypothesis in words and in symbols. Again, you can check out my video on hypotheses for how we go about writing out the hypotheses. Step 3, we have to justify the study was well run. So first, what we need is we need a good sampling technique. So for that, we need that it was random and that it draws from the whole population. And then we need normality of the sampling distribution. So the normality of the sampling distribution, we will have different conditions depending on which type of problem we are doing. So the conditions depend on the problem type. From here, we need to understand the sampling distribution. So we will need shape, center, and spread. Again, these will depend on the problem type. So we will do shape, center, and spread. And these will depend on the problem type. We will have normal, it's just the condition that will change. So we hope for normal. Then we will have to determine how our sample fits in the distribution. So we will have normal distributions. So we will have our sampling distribution. So this is our sampling distribution. And then our sample will fall somewhere in here. And our job essentially is to figure out the probability of being that extreme. The side we shade is based off of our hunch, based off of our alternative hypothesis. So just a side note, the side we shade is based off of our alternative hypothesis. So if our alternative hypothesis was less than, then we should shade to the left. If our alternative hypothesis is more, then we should shade to the right. So we take this and then we translate to z-score. So we move to z-score using the fact that z is equal to our sample minus the mean of our sampling distribution divided by the standard deviation of the sampling distribution. And then we use the applet to calculate probability. Typically, we deem 5% as our cutoff. So if the probability is less than 5%, we consider this to be a surprising sample. So if the probability is less than 5%, then we consider this to be a surprising sample. So the sample is surprising. Here's our big if. If the null hypothesis were true, and sorry, I scrolled up too far. So if the probability is less than 5%, then we consider the sample to be surprising if the null hypothesis were true. If the probability is 5% or more, then we consider the sample is sort of expected or is not surprising. If the null hypothesis were true. The probability we are finding is essentially the probability of getting a sample as extreme as ours if the null hypothesis were true. And then we draw conclusions. So again, if the probability is less than 5%, then we consider this to be strong evidence that the alternative hypothesis is true. If the probability is not less than 5%, so if the probability is 5% or more, then we do not have enough evidence to conclude the alternative hypothesis is true. So we have insufficient or not enough evidence to draw any conclusions. Typically, if we get this result for a study, then they will do the study again with a larger sample size. That makes this study more likely to be accurate. So these are the conclusions we can draw. Some language that you will see. This first thing, we reject the null hypothesis. So we reject H naught. And this next one, we are unable to reject. H naught, for null hypothesis. So those are the basics of hypothesis testing. It sounds like my daughter is about ready to play something else.